I'm gonna be 100% honest. If you know what you're doing, if you have enough free time, if you just genuinely like wasting time, the Linux distro you pick literally doesn't matter. You can turn Ubuntu into Arch Linux. You can turn Fedora into Slackware. Now, should you do it? No, it's not a good use of your time. You're much better off picking a distro which acts as a good starting point and then building off from there. And this is especially true if you're a new Linux user, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know how to do some of this really advanced stuff that most people never bother doing. I like to joke about Arch Linux and how Arch Linux is great and everyone should use Arch Linux, but if I'm being honest again, there is no definitively correct choice of distro. All of them are different starting points that are aimed at different kinds of people with different kinds of software installed, but there are some good ones that you should pick from, and later on, some general things that I think are worth avoiding. It could be 2015, 2025, frankly even 2035, and the tried and true Linux Mint is still worth mentioning. If you're the kind of person who wants as little change as possible, you want things to just be the way they are, your computer never changes in a way that you notice, and you can go 10 years and not touch the system and still feel perfectly at home, Linux Mint honestly is one of the better places to be. This makes use of a desktop known as Cinnamon, and this is the place where the Cinnamon desktop is being developed. Now, Cinnamon is very much like Windows 7 in many ways. Not exactly, so don't go into it expecting exactly that, but for the kind of interaction model, you're gonna feel right at home. Mint is never gonna have the latest, shiniest new features. It's never gonna be the exciting distro that, wow, you're running Linux Mint? That's so cool, tell me all about Linux Mint. It's a distro that's always just there in the background. It's a distro where you can always come back to it and know that it's gonna be something that you vibe with, because if you vibe with it 10 years ago, it probably hasn't changed in a way that you really notice that much. A prime example of this is right now the Linux desktop is in this transition from something known as X11 to this thing known as Wayland. Now, what it is doesn't really matter for the sake of this video. A lot of projects that I'm going to mention in this video have long since migrated over to the newer thing known as Wayland. And Mint is making progress to it, but when Mint ends up moving over, you know that everything's gonna be ready, everything's gonna be stable, and it's probably gonna take a long time because there are things that are still missing, there are things being developed, and Mint, again, doesn't really do the whole change thing. They want everything to be basically as smooth as possible. Now, the main version of Linux Mint is built on top of the work of the Ubuntu Linux project. And the Ubuntu Linux line is something that also needs a mention here as well. When you think of Linux, there's probably three pictures you get in your head. One is a terminal. It's blinking lights and you don't really understand what's going on. Another one is probably some highly customized setup, probably using a tiling window manager. And the third one, that's going to be the main version of Ubuntu running the GNOME desktop. And for better or worse, Ubuntu is the face of Linux. This follows a 6-month release cycle where every 6 months there is this new major update. The latest version being 25.10, the next version will be 26.04, and then 26.10, so on and so forth. Now, being the face of Linux and probably having the most users does come with a really good benefit. If you want to know something about the distro, know something about what's installed, get some support for some various thing that you want to do, there's probably someone who's already answered that or is willing to answer it when you ask the question. Now, a lot of the information you have on Linux is going to be transferable, but if you don't know what it is that you need to know, being in a community that has a lot of people does make this much easier. And whilst the main version of Ubuntu is using the GNOME desktop, this is a very popular desktop, This is not the only version of Ubuntu available. There is this thing known as flavors. These are basically modified versions of Ubuntu that are still under the Ubuntu banner, but are using a different desktop. There are things like Kubuntu. Edubuntu is a slightly different thing, but Kubuntu. This is Ubuntu with the KDE desktop. Then there is Lubuntu with the LXQt desktop, or Ubuntu Budgie with the Budgie desktop, Ubuntu Cinnamon with the Cinnamon desktop. This is the same Cinnamon you see on Linux Mint, just customized a different way. There is Ubuntu Kylin with the Kylin desktop. This is mainly targeted towards the Chinese users. Then you have Ubuntu Mate with the Mate desktop. I know it doesn't have a little accent, but yes, technically it's pronounced Mate. There is Ubuntu Unity with the Unity desktop, and Xubuntu with the XFCE desktop. All of these projects are all under the Ubuntu banner, and a lot of the things that you know about Ubuntu and that support community around Ubuntu are going to be helpful with these other flavors as well. Even though they're not the mainline version, they're still part of that wider Ubuntu banner. And you can always grab something like an Arch Linux like I'm using, and then install any of these desktops. That's totally available as well. But again, having that support structure around the first distro you use can be incredibly helpful. Now, it is worth noting, especially if you're using the LTS release, this is the April release once every 2 years, so 24.04, 26.04, 28.04, so on and so forth. This is the release where it's going to keep getting security updates and little patches here and there, but the main idea is for it to be a stable base for developers and servers and things like that. If you choose to run that longer than the 6-month period until the next version that is not an LTS version, you are going to start having really old software available on your system. And Ubuntu tends to lag behind in software updates anyway, unless we're talking about GNOME on the main version. A lot of things tend to lag behind, and this is the point of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is supposed to be a slower moving base than other things out there, but if you're the kind of person who wants to have really up-to-date software, that's just worth keeping in mind for Ubuntu. A Linux distro with a very similar model is Fedora Linux. This, again, has a release once every 6 months, around about the same time as well, so April and October. They don't have an LTS release, though, so you're always kind of expected to be on the latest version. There's a bit of a trail on if you want to stick on the old version for a bit, but generally expected that the current version is the current version. And again, like with Ubuntu, if we go to Get Fedora, then under the spin section here, spins are basically Fedora flavors. Here we have a bunch of different variants. So the main version, this is going to be the GNOME version. They also have the KDE Plasma version. Recently, that was promoted to be alongside Workstation as the main version. So GNOME and KDE, those are the main versions. But under spins, we have the XFCE version, Cinnamon, Mate and Compiz, LXQt, i3, LXDE, Budgie, Sway, Miracle, the KDE mobile desktop, Cosmic, and I'm sure that sometime down the line, there's probably going to be more of them. So like with Ubuntu, if you want to have that Fedora support ecosystem, but you want to try out other things, this still lets you do so. Fedora is a bit smaller than Ubuntu is, but it's still that same sort of umbrella in the Fedora ecosystem. I can't speak for every single spin because different people maintain these different spins. The spins are sort of the community-maintained versions, but when we're talking about Kubuntu, which is the KDE version of Ubuntu, and KDE Plasma Fedora, Fedora KDE tends to be considerably more up-to-date, and if you want to have the most up-to-date version of KDE, this is a much better way to do so. It usually lags behind a little bit, but a prime example being when there was a major new release going from the 5 version to the 6 version, it took a very long time for Kubuntu to actually start shipping that. But Fedora is not without its flaws. So it is a Linux distro in the United States. And when you're in the US, you have to deal with US tech patent issue nonsense stuff and licensing issues which don't necessarily apply in the rest of the world, and things like the NVIDIA drivers have to be placed out into a separate software repository, and you have to install that during the installation process. If you know it's there, it's easy enough to set up. It's not a big deal. But if you don't know that there is this sort of free software conviction on Fedora Linux, it's very easy to get tripped up by that and suddenly think that Fedora doesn't work, even though this is something which is fairly well documented. There's people that are going to be willing to help you, and it's well understood. It's just something that you might not know about. Are you literally just looking for SteamOS? You don't care about anything else. You just saw this SteamOS thing, you're like, wow, I love that. I love booting straight into Steam Big Picture mode. I don't want to think about anything. This is a gaming box. That is all. Bazzite. There are other things which are doing basically the same thing, but Bazzite is basically the best of the best. Just use Bazzite. This is built on top of the Fedora tech stack. However, it doesn't have those same Fedora problems. It adds in a lot of additional gaming things. There is a specific version if you have an NVIDIA GPU that'll go and have all that stuff set up for you, no problem whatsoever. You can just select what hardware you have here. It's going to go through everything you need to know, and then you'll be good to go. Bazzite is a really cool project. Now, I know people run this as their regular desktop system, but it's worth keeping in mind that the intention with the project was to make it like SteamOS, and you can say, I don't want to boot into big picture mode, I just want to use it like a regular Linux distro, in which case it's gonna kind of be like Fedora Silverblue. Silverblue is very big topic to talk about for this video, but it's known as an atomic distro, basically meaning it's more like Android, where you can't make really low-level system changes. Those are provided directly to you. And there are some nice update improvements, like you can't break your system if you lose power during an update, things like that. But it does come with some limitations. The idea of an atomic distro is still a fairly niche topic, and a lot of the information out there isn't really gonna be clear, isn't gonna indicate what kind of atomic distro you're using, plus there's different naming, there's atomic and immutable, so things get really confusing. But if your intention is building a gaming system, a home theater PC, a system where you play games on it, and that's its core purpose, frankly, there's nothing better to recommend than Bazzite. And to cap off this segment, I want to mention Zorin OS. Zorin's main purpose is to provide this nice, clean alternative that is very reminiscent of what you're used to over on macOS or what you're used to over on Windows. That is its core purpose. So if you're liking the idea of Mint, where it's very much like that Windows experience, but you want something a little bit shinier, something a little bit faster moving and flashier, Zorin OS is the more sort of a modern recommendation. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about things that I'll generally, maybe not necessarily say never use, but projects that I think right now might be worth avoiding, and why I didn't mention them earlier, even though some of them might be popular options. So, first up, I want to talk about a very popular option, that being known as Pop! OS. I know the System 76 guys, I know they're doing great work, but right now, I would say avoid Pop! OS at least for another year. So, System 76 has kind of been distracted working on their new desktop known as Cosmic. And recently, the new version of Pop! OS went into beta after there not being anything for like a year. Everyone was kind of just, where's Pop! OS? What's going on? I don't really know. And it's basically just waiting for Cosmic to hit its 1.0 release. After that point happens, then Pop! OS is once again going to be a solid recommendation, but at least for the short term, they've got some other priorities to worry about before that becomes the main focus. I also didn't mention any projects based on Arch Linux. These come in two main categories. Firstly are projects like Manjaro that have custom repositories. Then you have projects like Endeavor, Amaki, CashOS, Garuda, where they might have custom repos, but the majority of what they install comes directly from Arch. Both of these have some problems, which I wouldn't encourage new users unless they want to get kind of technical to sort of get involved with. The main issue with Manjaro-style projects is the Arch user repository. This is a popular place to install additional software not available directly through the way you install software on Linux. On Arch Linux, that being Pacman, that is the package manager available on this system. Now, this is built directly around Arch Linux. So there's going to be software versions and library versions and things like that where the version on Manjaro kind of lags behind Arch Linux. In many cases, this doesn't matter, but for some software, this can lead to it just not behaving correctly or not being possible to install without installing a bunch of other random things and sort of kind of weirdly configuring your system. In many cases, it's just not worth the hassle, and if you want to use the AUR, it's better to use something closer to mainline Arch Linux. With that being said, a lot of these projects like Endeavor, Garuda, Kashia, Marky are basically just custom installers for Arch Linux, installing a bunch of stuff pre-configured for you. The problem is because they're basically just Arch Linux, that means they're going to have basically just Arch Linux problems. So sometimes Arch has something known as a manual intervention, where there'll be a software update, and it can't be done automatically. You, as the user, need to go and fix something, whether it be install something else first, or modify a text file, or do something else. And this tends to get documented, and if you're someone who understands documentation and can, read a news feed, you can work it out relatively easily. But if you want something to be relatively streamlined, I wouldn't recommend a new user just jump right into that. This isn't something you've got to do like every other day. This happens maybe once every 6 months, once a year. But when it does happen, it can be very disruptive, especially if you're one of the first people to see it before it gets properly documented. It's a far less common recommendation nowadays, but I would also recommend avoiding any of the pen testing distros, any of the hacking distros. Not because they are bad tools, but because they are tools. This is a project, this is Kali Linux, this is intended for a specific purpose. Black Arch is the same, and a bunch of these other projects are exactly the same. They are a tool made for a job. You can daily drive them, but in most cases, they're not intended to be daily drive. There's going to be software missing, there's going to be choices they make which don't make any sense for a regular distro, and it's just a hassle. Don't put yourself through it, just use anything else. Okay, maybe not anything else, use one of the things I talked about earlier. I would also suggest avoiding any projects where they're kinda niche and unknown. Now, if you want to do so once you're getting used to things, hey, that's totally fine. But as your first distro, if you see something where it has one Reddit post that has 3 comments, maybe just don't go and use that, because there's not going to be a support structure there. There's very likely going to be little documentation on what the project is doing, and it's just going to make your life harder. Unless you know what you're getting into, or you're willing to go and find out by digging around through things, just don't bother making it your first. You can always come back to it later and try it out once you're used to things, but as your first distro, I generally recommend sticking to something where it has a community, it has documentation, it has people that are using it that can help you if something goes wrong. And if you're someone familiar with Linux, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what distro you would recommend to someone who is just starting up with Linux. What sort of desktop would you put them on? And do you have any general experience with this? I would love to know. So if you liked the video, go like the video. If you found it helpful, go like it as well. Go subscribe, that would be cool. And if you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and Distro.